October the 1st, 2022. Well, I guess the big mystery out here is who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, number one and two, which is kind of a bit of an interesting event. And I think that maybe if we get into why it was blown up, it'll point a little bit more to who, or at least to what group would be behind it. And I think that if you stay within what's called the Occam's razor, I think it comes down pretty easy to solve. If you get into all kinds of wild conspiracy theories, you can come up with all kinds of different actors that might or might not have wanted to do it and perhaps could have pulled it off. But I think when you look at the details, I think it's kind of coming to a rather interesting conclusion. Let's kind of get into that subject here. I mean, first of all, we know that it happened, I guess it would be on sometime in earlier this week, I think on Monday, I believe it was, when the actual explosions occurred, which were at fairly deep areas of the pipeline in terms of water, and managed to basically sever these lines and unleash a fair amount of natural gas into the water, which creates a safety hazard because ships can sink in an environment with that much methane in the water. So anyhow, and of course, since this time, it's been kind of a, well, bit of a mystery as to who's behind it. Of course, immediately Western sources from Ukraine, UK, and the United States are all blaming Putin and Russia for doing it. But I tend to think this probably is not the case. By the way, if you like these videos, please subscribe. Give me a like as it helps out with the algorithm, and also comments are appreciated. You can ring the bell for notifications. Yeah, so let's look at this. First of all, Putin blew it up. Why would he do this? Or does this make any sense? Well, probably. Here's the thing. It already, first of all, Nord Stream 2 had never been activated because as a boycott of Russia due to the Ukraine invasion. And then when you get to number one, it had recently been shut off by the Russians already. So whatever impact would be having, either economic or politically, was already being achieved by simply shutting it off. And they also were claiming it was due to some equipment failures, and they needed imports from the West that they couldn't get because of the embargoes to fix it, and therefore try to transfer blame to the West for the fact that Europe wasn't getting the natural gas from the pipeline. Okay, so by blowing it up, all they really would have done if they're the culprit would be to prevent themselves from changing policy, and thereby, eventually letting somebody acquiesce potentially to their position, and then rewarding them by giving them the natural gas back. Well, that is not an option for them anymore, and it makes no sense really that they would do this. And unless we're to accept that Putin has gone beyond being a rational political chess player in the geopolitical scene, and in fact is becoming a bit of a madman along the line of a Korean leader or somebody like that, if we're not willing to accept that horrible outcome, then it just doesn't make a lot of sense. There are other scenarios that I've heard on YouTube videos that are more like movie plots and really exotic ideas. Different factions within governments and other economic interests, but this seems kind of unlikely considering the magnitude of what we're talking about. So I come to the conclusion that who gains by it? Well, basically, the United States gains by it. The United States position gains by it. And therefore, I would say that whichever entity did it was probably someone that was allied in the pro-Ukraine as an anti-Russian faction. The exact implementers may be more obscure, and it could be more than one possibility, although when you ask yourself who would be the best at doing something like this, I think the Navy has teams that would probably be the best. So, at any rate, and they're also good at doing covert operations and hopefully keeping their mouth shut. So, that's where we get into the why. I think the why is this: by withholding the gas, Russia was clearly trying to blackmail Germany, particularly, and other European countries, um, to back away from the pro-Ukraine stance and back away from the economic sanctions in return for restoring their gas and therefore restoring their economy. Of course, that could lead to a lot of other issues if they really broke with us over this. And some people might not think they would do this, but remember that there's certainly growing protest inside of both Czechoslovakia and Germany over the current policies, and they're bound to get more intense as the temperature gets a little colder. And as the economy ends up having to choose between keeping the economy viable or having any heating fuel for the winter. And so it's conceivable to me that what may have happened at some point is that it became clear that to cut off any such possibility, it was decided by the U.S. government. And remember, also, this occurs during a time in which the Russians are becoming more bellicose and making nuclear threats and the like. And so perhaps this was a way to solidify the European position by knocking out these pipelines. There's no way back now. I mean, even if what can they really do? Because most of the other gas pipelines, like a lot of them, go through Ukraine. So you can't really abandon Ukraine and still get your gas from Russia that way, right? So you see, this makes a lot of sense, I think, on how it could play out like that. A lot of people are pointing to the statement that President Biden made some time back about that we could end it and all that. And yeah, that's true. I wouldn't even be surprised if the real contingency planning for this may not even go back to the Trump administration, frankly, because he was very opposed to this too. And I don't know that. I think a lot of times countries develop contingency plans for some kinds of operations that they're kind of on the shelf, and they break them out when there's really a need to do it. And I think it also perhaps would send a message to Russia as well as our allies in Europe that we're quite serious about our position and we mean business. And after all, Putin has been saying he means business, so maybe we send a message, yeah, we mean business too. And so that's why I tend to think that it was either the U.S. or somebody that did it with the approval of the U.S. that did it. And when you really look at the fact the U.S. had a naval vessel in the area, which was engaged in such things as dealing with underwater submersible robotic vehicles, and that are generally used for minesweeping. But the point is, definitely capable of planting explosives and the like. And it seems like we obviously had not only the motive, but we also had the opportunity to set this. Also, the timing was perfect. It happened during the big hurricane in Florida, and also now moving in, of course, to Carolina and South and North and South Carolina and so forth. I mean, this hurricane has dominated the news all week long because of its devastating effect in Florida particularly. And so hardly anything else is being covered during this period. I mean, and so these questions have been really not asked that intensely, and the news cycle tends to go into other topics. So that's another reason why I think it kind of points to us is that this would be an issue that would mean something to us a lot more than it would to most foreign actors to do it at exactly this time. Because again, why do it now? I mean, there's no imminent likelihood that Germany was going to shift policies in the near future, not in the next few weeks anyhow. So this would be something, so it would be kind of smart to do it ahead of the winter so you didn't do something so brash. And then, of course, by immediately blaming the Russians for doing it and by keeping it secret and ambiguous who did it, maybe we'll never know, or at least not for a long time, because, secret operation, everybody keeps their mouth shut. And, it's at least, however, a certain Polish official didn't, and he thanked us for doing it and then retracted his tweet a little bit later, apparently, when he got a little blowback for saying that. So, yes, he was off message. But apparently he came to the same conclusion I'm coming to, and a lot of other people are coming to that as well. Scott Adams and the Tucker Carlson and so forth, I think, are kind of in that school of thought. And I guess we could then, I finally get to the other question, was this a good decision? Well, on the one hand, I think it does solidify our position. On the other hand, there is a problem that it may eventually cause trouble in Europe, because after all, this could very well become a very prominent theory in Europe that this is what happened. And as they're sitting there shivering in the wintertime or out of work because their plant got closed down due to lack of energy, this could cause long-term repercussions. So that could be the downside to it. The upside to it is obviously they can't just cave to Russia and do what they want. So at any rate, we'll have to wait and see if anything new breaks on this subject. I have a feeling the people involved in this kind of an opera are the kind that keep their mouths shut, maybe. And we'll see. And of course, I could be wrong, and there's always a possibility that those third possibilities, those what I call movie plot, very unlikely things could be true. You could come into, other countries that might have an interest in doing this. But remember, you have to have a country that really has some capabilities in this kind of deep underwater operation. And no. Anyway, I'll kind of move away from that. Anyway, that's kind of what I think about that. We have had the annexation of the 4 regions in Ukraine into Russia, which is now being, of course, discredited by the West, of course, as being a sham elections and against international law. And so that won't be recognized, but it does have another effect. I would mention that that hasn't been discussed as much, I think. All this nuclear talk has been thrown around, but and even on my part, yes, I plead guilty here. But another thing you have to consider is that the Russian system isn't a true one-man dictatorship like, say, Nazi Germany. It is an oligarchy, and it does have laws and rules, and they get bent once in a while. But I think there's a need to maintain some perception of order. And so because they have these rules in which they've promised that they wouldn't, that use the conscript army in the special military operation as much, now that they have a whole new year of conscripts that pretty much probably completed their training, the basic and specialized training for most occupations in their military, they can now be used in Ukraine to fight the war, since they'll now be defending their home country according to Russian law and accepted principles there. So not just the whole issue of the nuclear issue, which we've talked about, but what about the conventional issue? The idea of being able to put all these extra troops into combat in Ukraine, which should give them some ability over a period of time to stabilize the front, because the Ukrainians have carried out some successful aggressive operations recently and broken the stalemate, particularly in the Kharkiv area, and they're putting on pressure in other areas. So it seems to me like this might very well be the immediate effect of this annexation. Otherwise, I guess I'll kind of start wrapping this up now. I would mention that in the last couple of weeks, the real clear average of polls have gone from average of 1.3% in favor of Democrats to 0.9% in favor of Republicans. And there's a lot of polls that are either showing a direct tie or Republican advantages up to as high as 5%. And one poll, which is still a registered voters poll, has the Democrats up by 2. So it looks like the generic ballot in the congressional election is looking a little bit more favorable to Republicans in the last couple of weeks, probably because their campaign has finally kicked off and they're probably starting to use their campaign ads and get their positions into play. So at any rate, and I'll also mention we'll be posting this on Rumble as well, and of course you can follow me on my social media accounts which are listed in the description below. And so I'll wrap this up for now, and until next time.